Greetings. My name is Letitia Hensley, and I'm the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools Director of Family and Community Engagement. We are excited that you are joining us today and know you will gain great insight from this session. At the conclusion of today's session, please provide feedback so that we can continue to support you with amazing sessions that will be provided throughout the year. Now, without further ado, we'll turn it over to our presenters.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Christopher Lacey Thompson. I go by Christopher, and we're excited to present with you today about understanding parent reports K-12. A little bit about us that we'll get to in just a second. We'll be presenting on a couple of different pieces of student data and the family reports that come with them.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Melissa Teal. I'm another one of the city data specialists.
So before we dive into our content, we want to take a moment and orient you to a few options you have available. If you need translation support, there are a few steps you can take to get that today. In the top right corner of your screen, you'll see the captions button. When you click the captions button and you click show live captions, you can select the language for the captions to be translated in for you should you need that support today. Also, there are a couple of different ways that you can engage with us as we do this Lunch and Learn presentation. Again, in the top right corner of your screen, near that captions button, you can click the Q&A to type a question you may have. We have another one of our colleagues, Jordan, who is monitoring our questions for us. There she is. And we'll also have some Q&A time at the end. And we also want you to feel free to share your reactions with that react button and use all the different emojis to engage with us as we go throughout this session. There are a couple of different resources here available for you. We're going to be going over some sample reports, and so my colleague has created a folder of all the sample reports and a folder with this presentation in it for you at this bit.ly link. This link will allow you to access everything we're going to share today. So I'm going to stop and pause for just a moment to make sure you can either write down or type in that bit.ly link so that you have access to everything we talk about today. So everybody take about a minute and make sure you can access the resources if you can follow along. And also the family and community engagement team dropped the bit.ly in the Q&A for you to be able to click. All right, I guess we'll keep moving, Melissa. So, as you might have heard me say earlier, or Melissa say, we are from the School Improvement and Data Integration team. We do all things district and school data, and it's our pleasure to present with you. Again, I'm Dr. Christopher Lacey Thompson. I work with mostly elementary schools. I have two colleagues that are going to introduce themselves really quickly.
Melissa Teal. I work with one of our middle school areas and one of our high school areas.
I am Jordan Speenberg. I'm also a data specialist, and I work primarily with elementary schools.
Thank you. And we do have one other specialist on the call with us. She can't pop on right now, but we want to make sure we introduce Dr. Claudia Allen, another specialist with us working primarily with high schools. So let's dive into our content. So we really want to know a little bit about you as an interface the best we can. So I want you to think for just a quick second, what will you spend most of your winter break doing? Will it be on vacation? Will it be holiday activities? Will it be family fun? Will you be relaxing? Will it be games? Or will you work? We want to take a second and give you a chance to engage and use that react button and show us how you're going to spend your winter break. Are you going to spend it with a thumbs up, a heart, a clapping emoji? So everybody take a second, find your react button, and choose the emoji that matches how you're going to spend your winter break. I see some hearts, lots of holiday activities. I see vacation, lots of family fun. All right. I plan on spending mine relaxing as much as possible. So let's continue. So, CMS strives to engage families and support achievement at home. And so, by supporting families, and so we're going to do that today by supporting families in understanding the parent reports that come along with some of the data your child collects over the year. So, you're going to see this symbol on the screen a few times, and it's our mission today to give you some resources, some knowledge, and just to understand some of the data reports that you're going to be seeing to help us bridge the gap between school and home. All of us are former teachers and administrators, and we know how important it is that you have the knowledge and are empowered to support your student in learning. So, what are parent reports? So, most of the assessments that we give to our students have some kind of parent or family report. And these reports provide you with information about the assessment in general and about your students' performance on those assessments. Today, we're going to talk about 4 different assessments that we take in our district that all have a family report that you have access to or that will be sent to you. That all give you the information to understand the assessment, a little bit about the assessment, and understand what your child was able to do and how they performed on that assessment. So 4 different assessments. We have our Master Review Predictive Assessments, MVPAs, our iReady assessment, our Access assessment, and our DIBBLES assessment. And we're going to talk a little bit deeper about each one of those things. So to start off, we have our Master Review Predictive Assessment, or MVPA. Some people call it a benchmark test or benchmark assessment. The parent report that matches the Master Review Predictive Assessment is the Individual Student Report, or ISR. So quickly, let's just talk just about MVPA. So who takes the MVPA? So the MVPA is taken by students from 3rd grade to 12th grade in math, reading, and science courses. So your students can expect to take this test from 3rd through 8th grade in their math courses, 3rd through 8th grade in their reading courses. They'll take this assessment in their 5th grade science course. They'll take this assessment in their 8th grade science course. In high school, it's a little bit different. Not all of the reading, math, and science assessment courses have this assessment. So they're going to have this assessment when they take biology, when they take math 1, math 3, and English 2. So in any of those long list of courses I named, or any course with an EOG test, your student can look forward to taking this assessment. So when do they take this assessment? So this assessment is given 2 times per year or 3 times per year, depending on the content. In 3rd through 8th grade, most of those courses is going to be 3 times a year, and our semester-long courses in high school is twice per year. And if you're in a year-long course in high school, it's 3 times per year. So why do students take the MVPA assessment? The assessment measures how well students are learning and mastering the content standards. So this is a benchmark assessment, meaning it's styled, it looks like, it kind of feels like some of the questions that they'll encounter on the EOG, but it's based off the standards that they're going to be learning and have been taught over the year. So the report that goes with, for you all, that goes with the MVPA is the ISR, or the Individual Student Report. So what is an ISR? So after the MVPA test is taken, the ISR provides families with information about their students' performance on the assessment and projections for the end of year assessment. So when should you expect to receive this? So you should expect to receive the ISR within 2 weeks after the MVPA assessment ends. Your school will be sending home your child's individual student report. So just to be as clear as possible, you might not get this 2 weeks after they take the test. All of our assessments sit in a window of time. So in elementary and middle schools, it's about 2 weeks. In high schools, it's about a week. So whenever that assessment window ends, then 2 weeks after that, you'll get the assessment. So it could be 3 weeks after your child takes the test. It depends on when It depends on when your child takes the test and how long after the assessment window they send home the report. Also, I know in our elementary school, sometimes when students take their very first MVPA at the beginning of the year, they'll hold the individual student reports until parent conferences. But a general rule that you can ask your schools about is after the assessment window closes, when the whole district is done testing in that MVPA assessment, you should be getting a report within 2 weeks that details what your student scored. So how will parents receive the ISR? Your child will bring home a copy of the report. They'll get it from their school, the school will print it, and they'll send it home. And right now this report is only in English. So let's take a look at an example. So some of you probably have seen this before, but this is an example. This is what every single ISR or student report looks like. At the top, you're going to have your testing information, what year it is, what content, which administration. In the center there, you're going to have your students information. So on the left side, so who's the student, who's the teacher, any school information. Pay close attention to what's on the right side of this box because this gives you the scoring key. This lets you know what most of the numbers on this report means. So similar to our EOGs, students who are proficient can get a level 3, a level 4, or a level 5. Students who are not proficient might get a level 2. So students take the assessment based on their answers. They're going to get a 2, 3, 4, or 5 in most of the places on this report. And I'm going to show you the one place where it doesn't work like that. The first thing you have is the student's overall projection. So how I read this and what this means is after the student has taken the test, based on the answers they got and based on what they put into their assessment, their overall projection is a 2-. And if I look back up at the key Melissa just had highlighted for me, that would be non-proficient, meaning on the standards that we've taught or the learning we've done and on the standards that we've tested on, this student is scoring in a non-proficient bucket. So if they had to take the EOG today, based on what we've learned, our best guess is that they will be projected as a non-proficient. Let's keep going. So then you're going to have a student projection score on each test, on each of the standards on the test. I see we have a question, so let me pop to Jordan before I get to my next point.
I was going to go ahead and let you finish. So we do have a question in the chat about how is this different from BOY or EOY testing? And so this assessment is going to be taken throughout the year by most students. So you may see this at BOY, which is beginning of year. You may see it MOY, which is middle of year, and you may see it EOY, end of year, with that final administration. So this is just one of the tests that they may take several times a year. We're going to talk about some other data points that also follow a similar pattern that they'll take at the beginning, middle, and end of year as well. So this is just one of many that we'll talk about.
Great, perfect. Thank you. Great question. Great answer, Jordan. So in this next category, we have a student projection score based on each standard. So I'm going to talk through the things that we see on this box. First, you're going to see the standard or objective. So that correlates to the North Carolina teaching standard. And then you're going to see a description of that standard. And I'm going to stop right there and talk about those two things. So the way I would read this is my first standard was NF1. And what does NF1 ask children to be able to do? So basically they need to explain why two fractions are equivalent. The next standard on this test was NF2, and that's a state standard. So what does NF2 say that students and children should be able to do? Compare two different fractions. So that's how those two first columns will read. When we add on our third column, we get that achievement level for how our students showed up for those specific standards. So let's go back to our first row. So in NF1, requires students to explain why two fractions are equivalent. This student scored a level 2, meaning back up at my key, they were non-proficient. If we go down to NF2, NF2 requires students to compare two different fractions. That 2 says they were also non-proficient. If they were to get a 3, it would be they were grade level proficient. If they were to get a 4, they have solid command, and so on and so forth. So that's the way we read this chart. So that again is in that 2 to 5. Next on here, we have the depth of knowledge scores. And so students score at a depth of knowledge or the difficulty. So when we think depth of knowledge 1, those are our basic recalls. Those are like our easier questions. When we think depth of knowledge 3, down there towards the bottom of this section, those are the most difficult questions on the test. We think depth of knowledge 2 is somewhere in the middle. And so in there's some descriptors of what you have, what a depth of knowledge 1, 2, or 3 question is. And again, back to my achievement level descriptor, we get how did our student do on those specific questions. So when we look here at depth of knowledge 1, it describes depth of knowledge 1, and then we have a 2, meaning when we look at all the easier, lower level questions from the assessment, our student was not proficient because they got a 2, back to that scoring key. When we look at depth of knowledge 3, down there at the bottom, when we look at all of the difficult questions, the most difficult questions on the assessment, our student was also not proficient. They got a level 2. Again, some students will get a 3. They'll be grade level proficient. Some students will get a 4. Some students will get a 5. It varies for every student because the individual student report. The last section on here, keep in mind what I always try to make sure to tell people on this report. This is the only section of this report that does not follow that 2 to 5 scoring at the top. The other 3 sections we talked about is all it's going to be is 2 to 5, 2 to 5, 2 to 5. This bottom comparison, as you can see with that 13 and 11, does not follow that. So what this is a comparison, and it gives you some like raw, explicit details about the questioning that the student was able to answer correctly. So what this says is the number of items the student answered correctly on this assessment. So how many questions did they get right? That was 2. The next one gives us a lot of information. The number of items answered correctly needed to be proficient. So our student here got lots of 2s. What this middle box tells me is the number of questions they had to get right to get a 3 to be at that proficiency. And so they needed to have 13. So we read this as our student got 2 questions right. If to be proficient to get a 3, then they would have had to get 13 questions right. And it shows us the difference. So they were 11 questions short. So the individual student report is one of my favorite reports to work with teachers and schools and leaders on, just because it gives us so much information. It tells us about their overall achievement level. It talks about the individual standards. What are they able to do and not do? It talks about the depth of knowledge, easy questions, hard questions in the middle. And it also tells us how many actual questions are they getting correct, and how many did they need to get correct to be proficient? What was the marking for this specific assessment? So really quickly, I know I've talked a lot. I'm going to give us about 2 minutes to just process and think about what we've talked about so far. Maybe 1.5, because I talked a little bit too long on that one. I'm going to give us about 1.5 minutes just to think about what we talked about so far. So in your reflection, think about these 2 questions and be ready to share. We may not have time to share, but that's okay. But think about, how could you use this report? When this report comes home, how could you use this report with your learner, your student, your child? And what are the benefits of having this report? So take about a minute and think through those things. And if anyone feels inclined to share, please use your engagement options to do so. So we've had a little bit of time to think, and I'll just share openly. So this report it is very friendly to use at parent-teacher conferences when you want to understand more. It's also very friendly to use when you want to work with your student and learner about goal setting, about what the goals they can set for themselves to accomplish. And the benefits for having this report are getting the insights into what happens when our students take that assessment. Oftentimes, the students go to school, especially with standardized testing, the students go to school and they take the assessment, and there's a whole nother world at home. And this can kind of bridge that gap in between. Well, what were you able to actually do, and what happened when it came time for you to take this assessment? And let me go to Jordan for a question and answer.
So we have, does this report reflect college and career readiness in grades 9 through 12 or just proficiency for a single particular subject in general? So what this report is telling you by using that key that Christopher pointed out in the top right-hand corner. So those are the achievement levels that our state uses on end of grade or end of course tests. In this case, 9 through 12 takes end of course tests. These are the achievement levels they use to say whether a student will be college or career ready. So they that meaning that they would score an achievement level of a 4 or a 5 in order to be considered college and career ready by our state. So this is aligning to those same achievement levels, and the predictiveness behind these assessments is saying if your child took an EOG in this subject or an EOC in this subject, they would be considered college or career ready if they score 4 or 5 on this assessment. So it's a predictor. This isn't definitive. What they get on the end of course test is what the state uses to make that determination. But yes, it is by a particular subject area.
Awesome. So we're going to move on to a different assessment, and we have our iReady Universal Screener, and the report is the 4 Families report. So what is the iReady assessment? So the iReady assessment is taken by students in grades kindergarten through 8th grade in CMS, and that's only in math and reading. So every kindergarten through 8th grader takes this assessment 3 times per year in math and 3 times per year in reading. So why do students take the assessment? This assessment measures the student's knowledge of content foundational information. So knowledge of mathematics foundational information, knowledge of reading foundational information. So the For Families report provides families with information about their students' performance on these specific assessment. This report is available online via the student portal of the iReady platform after each screening. You access this report online, not as in the other report who we get sent home. This report is accessed online. You'll need a school code, and it's available in multiple languages. So when we take a look at our 4 Families report, there are a few things we want to hit on this screen. We have our student, school, and our subject information. The information is similar to our other report. We have iReady also goes into what's the purpose of this report. And it really shortly and quickly, succinctly tells you what this report is for. We have a lot of testing information. So we have the overall performance section, and it talks about just the test date, what was our students' performance, what was their percentile rank, and a graph. And on here, there's going to be those tested skills. So they vary for reading and math. And so you're going to get those tested skills and the student's performance performance indicator on each of those. So when we read this by saying, so when our student took the test, overall in reading, they need improvement for their grade level. And phonological awareness wasn't assessed. Their phonics needs improvement. But let's look at high frequency words, since that one's a little bit different. So high frequency words for our student here says they surpassed level, meaning they scored above where they were expected. And then we get to vocabulary, they need improvement. So this chart is pretty self-explanatory based on the different domains. And know that those domains are going to differ for math than they are for reading. The last thing is a student reading level and a just right book level. So it'll tell you what their Lexile level is, and it'll give you a resource about how to find books that are at their reading level and the perfect amount of challenge for them to go to the next reading level. So really quickly, I'm going to take one more. We're going to take one more minute to think, and just thinking about our reflection questions are: how would you use this report with your child? So take about a minute to think that. And when we come back together after our processing and thinking, Melissa is going to take over and walk us through a few more reports. So again, this report can be used to setting goals and truly understanding what your student knows about those foundational things in reading and math. All yours, Melissa.
All right, I'm going to walk us through the next two reports. The first one we're going to start with is referred to as the WIDA Access report, and the report that would come home is also called the Individual Student Report. So who takes the Access students? First, not all students in CMS take this assessment. The students who do are those that are identified as multi-language learners in grades 1 through 12. And when is it administered? This is administered annually, and it's usually administered late January through March. The school that your child is at may have a larger window or a smaller window based upon how many ML students are enrolled at the school. Why do students take the WIDA Access Assessment? This assessment allows the schools and families to know how students are progressing with their English language proficiency. The assessment, we'll see in a minute when we pull it up, assesses 4 domains: reading, writing, listening, and speaking. So when we get the report home, it lets us know the scores that the student has achieved and a brief description of what each of the proficiency levels mean. When should you expect to receive the ISR? It comes out after the whole window is administered. Because it has a speaking portion, it goes away and gets evaluated and scored, and then results are validated. And so this report kind of takes a lot longer than the other reports that we are talking about today, primarily because of the speaking portion that has to be scored individually. And so these reports don't tend to come out until June. Sometimes they get mailed home with report cards or sent home with students right in that very last week of school if we get them by then. Other times they get sent home kind of at the beginning of the following school year. How will you receive this? It usually gets either sent home with your student, or if they're back in time and a school has availability in their summer mailing packet, it can get sent home at the end of the school year that way. It does come home in multiple languages, so it is offered in that way. When we look at it, at the top, similar to our other 2 reports, you've got that basic demographic information, so test name, student name, test level, and then the school and the district. In the middle, it just gives you that real basic description on the purpose of the test. And then in the middle, this is where it lets us know how students scored on each of the skills, or what you may hear an ML teacher refer to as a domain. And those 4 domains are captured in color here: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. The scale of this test goes from a 1 to a 6, 1 being the lowest score, 6 being the highest. And then we see 4 white boxes. So we see oral language, we see literacy, we see comprehension, and then we see overall. When I dig into one of those categories, so we'll say comprehension. Comprehension is a mixture of 70% from the student's reading score and 30% from the student's listening score. Out to the side, I'll take comprehension for the moment. Out to the side, I see a score of a 2.3. That lets us know that that student is an intermediate ML student with regard to their score. They're not novice. They're kind of in that middle range. As we start getting to 3s and 4s and a little bit higher, we start bridging toward advanced ML status. At the bottom of those white boxes, we see the term overall. That is your child's overall score when they average all 4 domains together. This is a very important number that schools look at and that we want to make sure families are aware of. In this case, this student is currently averaging at a 3.4. So that is an intermediate student. One of the magic numbers that we want to make sure that families know up until about 2 weeks ago was a 4.8. That is what a student needed to achieve in order to exit from ML services. The state legislature, as of the first week of December, has revised that exit criteria, and it is now a 4.5. And so for any families that have students in receiving ML services this year, the exit criteria is applied to the current school year. And so a 4.5 is the criteria to exit from ML services as of this school year. All right, at the bottom of this report, we see a description of what students can do at each proficiency level. And so we'll just look at that first one. So for listening, we see that this student scored at a level 2. I can tell that they scored at a level 2 because when I go up to listening, they scored a 2.8. The whole number is a 2, so they're almost to a 3, but it's still a 2. And so when we go to the box next to it for what students at this level generally can do, it bullets out items. So the student can identify main topics in a discussion. They can categorize or sequence information presented orally using pictures or objects. They can follow short oral directions with the help of pictures. They can sort facts and opinions stated orally. So that's what they can do. Those bullet points will change as students progress with their language acquisition. And this is pretty helpful for parents to know, what is my student being able to do on a language test? So just take a minute and kind of think about your thoughts about this report and how this can help you at home with your student and with your child, your scholar. All right, we are going to shift in to our last report. Before we do, I just want to wrap up on this one. This report was always helpful because sometimes parents know their children are getting ML services, but they don't know, how are they progressing? How are they doing? Where are some areas that we can focus and work on? And so that report really empowers parents to know, where might I need to push in and make sure we're getting a little more work? Other times it just helps you in having a conversation with a teacher about, what else can I do to support some of this?
Melissa, can we check in the chat?
Sure.
We have a couple questions about iReady. So this is going to go back to some of the iReady information that was given by Christopher. So Is iReady only a test for reading abilities of students? So no, iReady has a reading and a math component, so your student may take one or both of those. We also had questions about the paper copies of the iReady report look like what we showed. However, the online version shows the single numeric score with no additional discussion or breakout. So thank you for whoever lifted that. If you didn't receive a paper copy of your student's family report, please feel free to reach out to your school. They can absolutely provide that for you. So if you feel like you want that additional information, online wasn't enough, please reach out to them. We also had a question about if there are planned dates or a calendar for taking MVPAs and other tests by grade level. So I don't, the district sets the windows for when these things have to happen, but individually the schools will choose what dates students test by grade level. So if you have questions about when your student might test, please feel free to reach out to your school. Every school has a testing coordinator, so that would probably be the person that you'd want to reach out to at the school level, and they can give you those dates. And then we also had questions about, will the presentation be sent out to parents? The resources and the bit.lys are there. Our colleagues in family and community engagement have redropped that bit.ly link. And they also have a Family Academy on demand library. So I think somebody earlier had said they missed a session Monday. You can always hop into their video on demand library to see the sessions that you missed. And if there are any other questions, I'll get to them in the chat and we'll let you know.
Thank you, Jordan. All right, our last report for today is the Dibbles Home Connect report. Dibbles is an assessment that is taken by our K-2 students. So for the current school year, K-2 students in CMS are required to take this assessment. This is a state required assessment. Schools may choose to administer to all students in K-5. That is a school choice if they want to give it to students in 3-5. How often is this administered? It's administered 3 times per year. So similar to the MVPA that Christopher referenced earlier, this one has a beginning of year, usually in September, a middle of year in January, and an end of year that is in May. The window is a little bit longer because students are completing some of these portions in one-on-one fashions or, whole class. And so to get through an entire K-2 in a building can take a considerable amount of time, as there are multiple parts to this assessment. Why do students take this assessment? So this assessment measures how well students are learning the basic foundational literacy skills. So all of the things that help make us strong readers, so then we can really shift from learning how to read to reading to learn. The Home Connect letter is the name of the report that comes home, and it provides you with information about your child's performance on the assessment. You should expect to receive this one within 2 weeks after the window ends. So again, similar to the MVPA, because it has a window, the reports do not become available until after the district kind of closes the window, and it allows the system time to process the data and to calibrate each child's individual letter. How will you receive it? Your child should come home with a copy. This report is available in English and in Spanish. And here's what this report looks like. So up at the top, we again have, basic demographic information. In the middle, it tells us why the student is being assessed, and then what do kind of the assessments mean. Out to the right is some pretty important information. So the very first really pivotal piece of information is the number that's listed next to the Dibbles composite score. So the Dibbles composite score is the overall score that a child has achieved after each of the smaller sub-measures and subtests on this assessment. And so in this case, this student scored a 302. Now, this is a first grade student. I see that up at the top. Little Samir in this example, in this demo report, is in the first grade. This 302 is in a red circle. When we drop down ever so slightly to the performance level key, we see 4 colors. This report is very color coded. So whenever we see red, that means that that student is well below benchmark. When we see yellow, that means that this student is below benchmark. They need some support to get caught up. They do not require as much support as a student who is well below benchmark. When we see green, that means that the student is at benchmark. That's kind of the goal of where we would want students to kind of be. When we see blue, we see above benchmark. That means they are performing or achieving above the goal of where we need them to be or would like them to be. Beneath that, we see the subtests that make up the DIBELS assessment. So these are all the reading skills that are tested, and it kind of gives you a description so that you know what each test means. So for first grade, this is some of them. This is not all of them. Students take a letter naming fluency test. In some of the reports, you'll see it identified as LNF, and they're physically just identifying uppercase and lowercase letters. Out to the side, we see the student identified 6 correctly. That placed them in the red or well below benchmark category. I then see 2 numbers underneath. So the lowest score to place into the below benchmark is 32 correct. The lowest score to reach into that green or at benchmark category is 42. So we can kind of see different markers of where students can place, and then we can see, well, where did our student place? We also see phonemic awareness on this assessment, and we see that we have 4 colors on this assessment because this submeasure allows for all 4 benchmark categories. We see decoding. From top to bottom, it's going to start with the most kind of foundational skill, in this case, letter names, and it works its way into deeper levels of foundational reading skills. So just building blocks, if it were. So we start with the most foundational, and then we just layer on tests to help build a strong reader. All right. In the Home Connect report, it does provide you with some activities that are aligned to how your student scored. So I'm actually going to go back a slide. So we see phonemic awareness right here. We see when we look at this report, and I come down here to the reading skills tested, that our student scored a 10. The lowest score to be in yellow is a 19. And the lowest score to be in green or at benchmark is a 31. The goal is always to try and work toward getting to green. So the Home Connect report has analyzed all of that data and looked at, okay, that 10, what are some high leverage activities that we can kind of do and send home with for parents to work on to help get up to that score that we want to, that green score that we want to. And so for phonemic awarenesses, they give you a couple different activities, and they kind of give you directions for how to engage with your student at home with that. And it'll give you different activities for different of the submeasures. So again, just kind of reflecting, what are, some ways that this would be helpful for you at home? And while you're pondering that, I will defer to Jordan for questions from the box.
We got lots of good questions.
Oh,
All
good.
right, so I'm going to try to kind of rapid fire some of these because we got a few good ones in here. So now there's no map correct. Is this iReady now? That is correct. iReady replaced map as our district's universal screener this year. So this is a new change. But anything that you heard things talked about with map, this is serving that same purpose as a diagnostic assessment to figure out what skills your students need to strengthen. There was a question about a district code for iReady. So I did post that in the chat. There is a district code available for iReady. There was a question about magnet programs and students' performance on these assessments. One thing I will say is that some students in certain magnet programs will or will not take these assessments and may take some different assessments just due to the nature of the program they're in. So for example, if you have a student in language immersion, they may not take DIBELS, but they may take a different form of foundational reading assessment. For example, in French, they would take the EDIPEL assessment. So there may be an equivalent based on the program that your student is in. But if you have any questions about the status of magnet programs, we do have an entire magnet department. They are awesome. So please feel free to reach out to them if you have questions. And this was a really great question about sort of the totality of all of this. So I hear you asking us to consider how we would use this data with our students, which is awesome. But I'm wondering, with so much data to sift through, how do I truly prioritize what to talk to my students and her teacher about? And how do I know how to summarize all of this and what to be most concerned with? So the real answer is you don't need to necessarily summarize all of this. I'm a parent of a school-age child, and I sort of would bring this up with my student when I have the opportunities. So if she's talking about what she did at school that day, or I see that she did really well on her assessment and I want to kind of like, talk her up around that, that's when I would bring this up with my students. No one's expecting you to go home and be this data guru. Certainly, if you see results on that student's report that are concerning to you and you want to know how your teacher's responding to that, those would be really good questions to ask. Sometimes, for example, with my own child, again, like I'll see her struggle with something and I'll say, oh yeah, I also saw her struggle with that on iReady or something along those lines. And so then I can open up that conversation of like, hey, I noticed you're struggling with this. And when you meet with your teacher in a small group, are you working on these types of things? So certainly you do not need to go home and do a data session with your kid. Teachers are expected to speak to students about data in one way or another. And if you're concerned, absolutely bring that to your teacher's attention so that you can figure out how they're responding to this data. And colleagues jump in because that's a massive question. So if I miss something, throw it in there.
No, I think you answered that one well.
I think you answered it perfectly.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all for leaning into the space and asking questions. So as we kind of wrap up some of our time together, we wanted to give you all just an opportunity to kind of reflect. And so we call this an operational reflection. We're all leaning into our math. We have a specialist here in the district who says we are all mathematicians. And so we're going to be that today. So when thinking about adding, what will you add to your conversation with your students and or your teacher and or their teachers? When thinking about subtracting, what will you stop doing when helping your students with learning? Multiplying, who else can you share these ideas with? Right? You were able to come today. I know I have fellow parent friends in CMS who weren't able to join us today. And so I'll make sure that I go back and, share what we've covered today with them to make sure that everyone's capacity is built. And then divide and conquer, trying to figure out what is owned by you, what is owned by your student, maybe which piece is owned by your teacher. I think back to the question that was just posed, and knowing that you don't have to have all the answers. You don't necessarily have to be the one to lead the question. You can, lean on the teacher or ask the questions of the teacher. So just thinking about some of those pieces. Give everybody a minute to just kind of reflect on that. And then we definitely want to be able to hear from you. So this session today was actually the result of a session that Dr. Lacey and myself and another one of our colleagues presented, I believe in October. And this was a session that was requested by families. And so the district and our lovely colleagues in family and community engagement heard you and reached out to ask if we would host this session. So, we are being responsive and your feedback is very valued and appreciated. So we've got the bit.ly and would love to hear feedback from you all. If I could ask one of my colleagues, is that in the Q&A for families to click on? Do we know?
It is. The
Beautiful.
family
Okay.
team put it in there.
Beautiful, thank you. So it is in the Q&A if you want to click on that and provide that feedback. And on behalf of the city team, we thank you for joining us today and for engaging in the work. It looks like we may have a last few questions. So Jordan, go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. They're still coming. And we appreciate it because there is certainly a lot to understand and know about all of this data. One question is about sometimes they receive the reports in black and white. And that's absolutely, if that's a concern of yours that you're not getting the full picture of what's happening from the report, that can certainly be something you would ask your child's school and just let them know it's hard to read in black and white, and they can hopefully help you out with that. We have a question about how many questions are in total for iReady and WIDA. That's a great question. iReady is an adaptive assessment. So depending on how your child's doing, their questions will kind of get like harder, easier. There may be more just to determine where they really are performing. So the answer is between 50 and 60 questions, but it just depends on how your child's doing. As for the WIDA assessments, there are around 60 questions total, but WIDA assessments are divided into the different domains of language acquisition. So there's a reading component, a writing component, a listening component, and a speaking component. So all of those have various question lengths because it really is determined by what grade your child's in. So the answer is around 60, but that varies. Lots of questions about the district iReady code. So yes.
I'm just going to add real quick to the WIDA assessment, and forgive me for not saying it earlier. The WIDA assessment, all 4 domains are not tested in the same day. So a student is only allowed to take one portion of those tests in a day. And so it really kind of breaks that assessment apart so that they don't get fatigued because of all of the different ways that they are assessed on that.
Yeah, that's a great caveat. Lots of questions about the district iReady code. I posted that a couple times in the Q&A. So if you're able to get into the Q&A, it's in there a few times. So this question I think is great to sum all of this up. Why are there multiple tests for the same things, reading and math? And that is such a good question. In CMS, we have what's called the balanced assessment system. And all of these tests fit into that, in that they all serve a different purpose. So something like an MVPA is going to tell us how your kid is doing on a specific set of standards. So what they've been taught so far, content, grade level standards. Something like iReady is going to diagnose what skills might be a little bit weaker and what skills might be a little bit stronger that help your student get to those standards. So iReady is not necessarily assessing the full standard or pieces of a grade level standard. It's really determining for us where your student's performance level is currently and what skills they need to strengthen, and what skills they're already very good and strong with. So they all serve a different purpose, which is why it feels like kids test a lot. Also, and I'll also say this, some are just required by the state. So we have to do them because that's what the state has determined. So we're trying to get a full picture, trying to give teachers as much information as they can about how to engage with your students, how to help them grow academically. So that's why we have so many various tests. And I hope I didn't miss anything. Question about a specific student score on iReady and how to know what percentile they're in the overall test. That would be something that would be available on the reports for iReady. I don't have those memorized. I don't know if any of my colleagues do, but
what was the
those
question?
would be something. Say that again.
What was the question?
If your student has a specific score, how do you, like, they posted a score, what percentile are they for the overall test? So I think that would be something you'd want to look on your family reports for, or you could certainly ask your child's teacher and they can provide that information. So not every portion has 50 to 60 questions on the WIDA test. That's a great question. There are about 30 for speaking, around 60 total for listening and reading, and there are 2 writing prompts in the writing session. And again, it's all going to depend on the age of your child. So kindergarten tests obviously are much shorter than maybe middle school or high school tests. So that's determined by grade band. And again, to Melissa's point, they're not taking all of this in one day. I think the max they can take is 2 domains in one day. So they would maybe see 30 to 60 questions in a day, just depending. And then just remember there's only 2 in that writing section. And then this has been very informative and answers to all the questions. Awesome. We're so glad to hear it. This again will be posted on the on-demand library if you have questions and you have access to the bit.ly to get to the PowerPoint if you want to review any information.
We'd like to again thank everybody for coming, and we hope everybody has a wonderful day. If you've completed your feedback, we invite you to go ahead and have an amazing rest of the day.